Thank you, Balind. I'd also like to set the record straight. It was actually Jan who had 5 minutes left and Dean 2, so I think you're leading. But okay, so I would like to start with actually a question because we have a lot of experts in the room. So I'd like to ask who here has been asked to fill out these long, tedious, never-ending expert surveys without receiving any sort of monetary remuneration? Lots of hands. Okay, great. I have bad news. Even though our title is Who Needs Experts, and we're trying to see if maybe AI can do a better job, Dean will show that that's not really the case and will continue needing your expertise. But okay, so this paper, it sort of emerged out of two gaps that we identified. So the first, it concerns limitations in existing expert surveys, which is what I'll be focusing on. And the second, which Dean will present, explores whether AI can complement or at least or compete or complement with experts when assessing the policy stance of political parties. The starting point for our expert survey was the observation that most existing surveys focus either on ideological positioning or on organizational characteristics of parties. Policy positions, when measured, are often inferred from discourse, such as manifestos, speeches, or broad expert impressions. And while these approaches, they contribute sort of greatly to our understanding of political parties, they often tell us less about what parties actually do once they are in office. So our contribution was basically to ask experts to evaluate parties' concrete policy behavior rather than their rhetoric. We did this across 6 policy areas. So we looked at foreign policy, social policy, gender, education and culture, immigration and citizenship, and the environment. We then piloted the feasibility of such a policy-focused expert survey in Hungary. A few words about data. So we collected data in the summer of 2025 through an online survey. We included 27 policy-specific questions, which translates roughly to 5 to 6 per policy area. We then invited 60 experts, including political scientists, think tank researchers, NGO experts, and political journalists. In the end, we received 19 valid responses, resulting in a 30% response rate, which my more experienced colleagues say is quite a solid result. So to talk a little bit about results, overall expert assessments aligned very well with what we would expect based on party ideology. So right-wing parties clustered around restrictive migration policies, the rejection of universalist social policy, and support for pro-birth policies. Left-wing parties, on the other hand, tended to align around more inclusive citizenship requirements, decentralized educational curricula, and support for non-traditional family models. So in this sense, experts performed exactly as we expected, and the survey showed high internal consistency along left-right ideological cleavages. Also, by focusing on policy rather than discourse, we could identify cases where what parties say does not fully align with what they do. And environmental policy, which is more my area of expertise, is a very good example. So when experts were asked to rank parties according to their support for the green transition, they placed far-right and illiberal parties such as Fidesz and Mi Hazánk towards the lower end of the scale. And this aligns, of course, with their policy record, which includes limited support for wind and solar investments and the frequent framing of green policies as harming national interests. At the same time, there's a growing literature on far-right and illiberal approaches to sustainability, which is also what my PhD is about, which shows that there's increasing rhetorical support for environmental goals without corresponding policy commitments. And so the expert survey helped us uncover these kind of discrepancies between discourse and policy. So at the same time, we also observed some results that were more difficult to interpret. One example here concerns NATO and NATO contributions. So despite Fidesz's highly critical and often pro-Russia rhetoric, experts ranked it as the second most pro-NATO party, which we found quite confusing, to say the least. We also observed modeled results within the left-right spectrum, particularly on this question about support for policies addressing low socioeconomic groups. So while parties positioned on the left and the right were placed at opposite ends of the scale, or at least far left, far right, the space in between was much less structured. So in several cases, centrist and moderately right-wing parties were rated as more progressive on this issue than parties typically classified as liberal. And so this suggests that ideological labels alone do not fully explain expert judgments on concrete policy questions. And these patterns, they sort of led us to reflect on the limitations of expert surveys. Jan mentioned that there may be an outdated form of collecting data. I think there's a lot of disagreement about that in the room, but it's true that although, let's say, we received 19 valid responses, many other experts started it but never actually finished the survey. Experts often also selected values at the very extremes of the scales, suggesting that there was limited nuance in some responses. And third, in some cases, experts provided identical answers across entire batches of questions, pointing to possible fatigue or heuristic answering. So taken together, these findings then led us to a broader question, which is, can AI, the hyped up LLMs and all of that, help complement expert assessments by systematically processing policy-related statements and actions? And this is what I turn to next, or this is what we turn to next, and I hand over to Dean.
Okay, hi again. So now to my side, Peter and Bulent did an excellent pilot study of Hungary using their network of experts they know. And so I thought, okay, well, let's test this against, AI methods. Like, do we really need experts or not? We could say expert versus AI. That sounds a bit too competitive. I don't think of AI as being a replacement I don't think of it as being better than experts, but maybe as a complementary data point. And so maybe we can give experts a break. So the question is maybe more who needs experts, or do we still need them? The motivation being that experts are often overworked and underpaid. Let's give them a break. Let them spend more time with their families. Go to the beach. Have some time off. Experts also, they might score parties using less than complete information. Sometimes we're asking them to score very small parties on very non-salient issues. They're using shortcuts to do the scoring. They might satisfy based on party type, expectations. And so large language models are catching up to expert level assessment. I have my research assistant do expert scoring sometimes, and LLMs do better. And I don't want to tell them that. I don't want to break their hearts, but it's like we're getting to that point now, I think. And so can LLMs replace experts is the question. So what do? This is the strategy. So we give LLMs information about parties, right? We don't rely on their knowledge of the world as if they actually know about parties just in their kind of bank somewhere of unknown knowledge. We're looking at what do party members say. So again, for data, I'm using, again, the parliamentary speech data. And so we're giving LLMs a code book, translating the code book that Bulent and Peter developed, but I'm using that as a prompt and asking them to score then party member statements. And so this parallels the expert scoring process that you've all done when you're asked to do these kinds of surveys, but with an LLM looking at text, at speech, what parties say. And so the payoff is, we as experts can decide what's theoretically interesting, but LLMs can be the workhorses that do a lot of the work and look at and process large amounts of data. Speeches in Parliament. This is from the Parliament data sets. 2,700 speeches from 2023. To maximize the amount of information that we can extract from these, I break this up into paragraphs. So that's about 13,000 paragraphs by all 7 parties in Hungary in 2023. This way we have an equivalent unit of analysis, because some speeches, again, are very long, 5,000 words. Some are very short, just a few hundred. So, same unit of analysis, same length of speech, one paragraph, about 250 words. It's most likely kind of length to express one single idea, not more, not less. And so the context is suitable for our purposes. This is Parliament. Parties are most likely to debate policy and state their positions on policies. Okay, this is just an example of the question on NATO. The left is the code book. The right is my translation to the system prompt for the LLM. It's asking, so 0 is a score that the party is strongly against increasing NATO contributions, 10 strongly in favor of increasing NATO contributions, and it's basically somewhere in between here is what the score that the experts give, or based on a statement in Parliament, what the LLM gives to that same question. And so again, you're repeating this over several hundred, several thousand statements, and then taking the average of that to average that party's position on NATO, on social policy issues, on education issues, on the environment, and so on. You are also giving, crucially, you are also giving the LLM the option of saying that it's not relevant, right? Like, because a lot of these are not about NATO, they're not about education, they're not about whatever else. So you say, give a score. If it's relevant, if it's not relevant, reply NA, and so that way you get rid of most. Like out of 13,000 speeches or paragraphs, maybe 800 to 1,000 are about NATO. So you're getting rid of all that noise. And you also get a measure for salience. So you have a sense of like some topics are just not talked about and it's really hard to score them. And I was looking at abortion in 2023. It was mentioned 5 times. So I couldn't score it. I had to go back to 2022, where there was some debate in Parliament in Hungary about it. So you get a sense also of salience then. Okay, and so, for example, the LM scores each paragraph. You take the average of the paragraphs, party positions for 2023. How do we know this is any good, right? How do we know the LM is actually scoring these paragraphs correctly or not? We still need some experts to do some checks, right? So you're still looking at the text scores at the text level to see how well it's doing. For example, this is a statement from Parliament by an opposition member. I'll let you guess which party if you're a Hungarian expert in the room, saying that peace, neutrality, independence should be the most important values in international policy in NATO. Supporting the Hungarian veto of NATO expansion in order to avoid World War II. I think he meant 3. And he's criticizing the Orban government as having joined the international line along with the Hungarian liberal opposition and helping serve American interests. So clearly opposed to NATO expansion, kind of would be supporting limited funding of NATO from Hungarian coffers. The LLM scored this as 0. Our 2 human coders also scored this as 0. I chose this as a good example. There was disagreement in some examples, but this one was a good, kind of nice example where there was agreement. And then we can use kind of classic interreliability scores to see how the LLM is doing compared to what a human being would score the text. And so the Krippendorf's alpha for all these coders is 0.77. That's quite good. Human interreliability is a little bit higher among the 2 human coders, 8.82. But so the reliability seems good. Like a human being looking at this would generally give the same score than an LLM would across all these paragraphs. So it's matching human accuracy levels. And the people who are, Hungary country experts. Okay, so then let's see. Just another metric of agreement. So this is the agreement between the LLM score and the expert scores on foreign policy. And so the correlation in general is quite high. On each particular question, so this is question to question to question on Russia, on China, on Ukraine, NATO, international, the role of the state in international politics, and should they emphasize pragmatism in international politics or democracy, some more ideological kind of approach to international politics. And the correlation is generally above, those numbers are a little bit garbled, but above 8 or even 9 for most of these. So pretty high correlation. So the AI does quite well in comparison to what experts would give to these parties. And you can see, for example, Peter emphasized the surprising result of Fidesz, and the LLM also gives the same thing. So Fidesz is scored as being quite pro-NATO along with the rest of the parties. So it actually did join the liberal opposition in taking up the international line, supporting the opposition. That seems to be what experts say and what LLMs say looking at these, the text. Only Mihazank is opposed to NATO, for example. So you can see some corroboration using these different, very, very different data sources and very different approaches. So again, I will just overall correlation across different types. So among social policy was also quite high. Among education was also quite high, 0.9 for most of these. So again, tight correlation between all of these what you can do with this is similar to what I was talking about in my previous discussion, which is that you can do this to more years. You can get time series data for these positions. It gives you more kinds of questions you can answer with this. You can get data on newly emergent parties that aren't in parliament yet. So potentially you could gather data from TISA that are speeches given in public, that aren't in parliament, but you could anticipate what their positions are on the same scale. And so it's much more fast in time. And so, right, it's faster. You can measure party positions as they emerge. You don't need to wait for experts to respond, so you have a quicker turnaround, potentially. So you can give experts a break. Let them enjoy their vacation, spend time with their families. LLM should do some of the heavy lifting. That is my takeaway.